In order to show the techniques of painting of the French Impressionist school, we've arranged this little board showing the precursors of the movement. Here we have Turner and Constable with Corot, Courbet, Boudon, Yonkin, d'Aubigne, Rousseau, and so forth, right through the French Impressionist movement. Of course, in the history of French Impressionism, there's a diverse amount of knowledge known about each painter, but what we do know about them was there was a relationship existing, both and comradely, helped each other much. And indeed, Corot, this wonderful man here, was a great man in respect to Daumier, went blind. 3 of the artists on this board went blind at the end of their lives through overwork, especially Daumier doing lithographs. And Corot bought Daumier the house he was renting for his birthday, which is rather a beautiful thing to do for anyone. Delacroix is famous, of course, for his colour. Courbet was a communist and went into prison in the early revolutionary days of the Commune. And of course the others we know so well, but Pissarro was Jewish, he was a founder member of the group, and had a great effect upon the other painters as a kind of a paternalistic figure more than any of the others. We then go on to Monet, of course, so very famous now, who vies with Pissarro for the founder membership of Impressionism. Renoir we all know as a sensuous painter and very beautiful, had arthritic hands at the end of his life. Sisley, the French Anglo chap. Bazille was a wonderful man, a giant of a man in stature, a giant in heart because he helped his less well-off comrades. The 2 ladies, Bertha Morisot, Mary Cassatt, both extremely famous in their own days as beauties. Cassatt was a great painter in her own right, and of course a student of Degas. Bertha was related to Manet, and of course this is a painting by Manet of Bertha. Manet I'm doing in the next programme is Olympia. Cézanne, of course, a very rich man. We'll go on to him later. Vincent doesn't really come into this, except he did paint impressionistically towards one part of his life, and he gave this up for his own personal type of painting, which I'll show you or endeavour to eventually. I would like to demonstrate the technique of one of these painters. I've already shown Turner and Constable, so we'll have a little go at Rousseau. Rousseau and the Barbizon School were the first painters as a group that worked out of doors, they called it plein air painting, in the forest of Fontainebleau. And the first thing to remember is that the actual palette of these painters, Constable, Turner, all the academic painters, matched closely the canvas or panel on which they worked, which makes for easier recognition. One can see the tonal relationships. First, he would paint in probably very quickly with a palette knife a few marks. Imagine there's a river here or something. He wouldn't, of course, work quite at this speed because he had to do it very quickly. They would very quickly establish the form of the tree. Let's make this an oak tree. All trees, as far as I know anyway, partake of the shape of the leaf. So we have a leaf-shaped oak tree, and the oak tree, I think, has got 5 bits on it. So they make a shape, something similar to that on one oak tree, and a smaller tree here of a different nature. And so forth. The blue of the sky, especially the sky of the south of France or the mid of France, is very intense in light. And this is exemplified normally by painting the area that's going to be there pink first. I haven't time to do this now, so I'll scumble this on, allowing this brown to show, reddy brown to show through, to show the transparency that is achieved by a thin coat of blue, allowing the red undercoating to show, to give it luminosity. On this is applied a very thick impasto of white lead for the forming of the clouds. Remember that these men, and one or two ladies incidentally, of great skill, went out into the open, painting gently and quietly in the countryside and creating a new form of painting by the very fact that they're close to nature. They would sit usually in a group of 2 or 3 comrades working alongside each other and discussing the painting at the end of the day, or alone with their own thoughts. And they made a distinct and personal type of painting, as distinct from the romantic school of David and so on in France. And they were the precursors of French, so-called French Impressionism. On the colour ground, the warm ground, Rousseau and people of his kind that painted this way would have applied much of the paint initially with palette knife, because you can obtain a very quick effect and a broadening of everything. And after a few deft strokes, looking from nature at the trees, let's imagine these are the 2 trees here, he would block out very quickly the broad shape of the oak tree and then the willow here, and intersperse it with lights. The object is that by imagining a summer tree, the green on it, with a thick impasto, which you can bring across the trunk or wherever the form is, this can be afterwards rendered more accurate by brushes. What I'm trying to get to is the fact that Rousseau would have used a very, very similar, practically identical technique to Constable, our own painter. He worked in the open, the only difference being that Constable worked on oiled paper outside, very many, 6, 7 drawings a day, sketches a day. Rousseau worked basically on canvas, which they often rolled and carried with them on their back and unrolled and tacked out temporary on a little sketching aid. Or they usually had an umbrella, a large sunshade, which is almost important. If anyone's ever painted outside, it's essential, because once the sun breaks through, it destroys your eyesight and you cannot see the tonal relationships. What you're looking at, your eyes become tired. The other thing about painting plein air is that apart from mosquito bites, etc., of course, you have a false sense of values in one sense and a wonderful sense of values in another. And everything you paint outside looks dreadful relative to the nature around you, but as soon as it's brought into the house or studio, it achieves what you set out to do. You achieve what you've worked for, and this is, of course, a value. Rousseau, Boudon, Jonkin, d'Aubigne were 4 painters interrelated in a strange way. Jonkin, of course, was Dutch and painted according to the tenets of his masters, the old Dutch painters of the 17th century. And he, in turn, influenced Boudon. Boudon was what one would call a middle-class French bloke, and he painted a very delightful form of painting, what one would call it seaside painting, for want of a better form. He was followed in this field by Degas, Manet, Monet, Courbet, and many others, of course. His method of painting was distinct from Rousseau and the previous masters. By now we have a lighter canvas of ochre. They vary. This is not a new idea. as a matter of back to time for that now, but the idea is this. Putting blue upon the pale yellow or pink, it's a relative colouring comes through. It's the optic. It's the complementary colour, so the blue, the opposite of blue being yellow, the yellow makes the blue appear bluer. So he would wash in quite slowly, rather enjoying it more than anything, a little colour, grey colour. I'll use a larger brush because of the time element. He would use rather shorter, stab-like, flickering movement. He used black for drawing, and I'll just indicate a little gentleman here with his lady in the Victorian. About this speed he'd block this in. A little child to break up the skirt, and a doggy here and so on. Then someone behind. The whole thing having a movement towards the edge of the canvas to make it appear that they're moving, walking towards the canvas, out of the picture. And he would arrest this movement by possibly the beginning of steps going down and something going this way, and a few little figures going down there, and so forth. Then he would work out the colouring. As in Constable and Corot, it's always a good thing to put in, initially in a picture, a piece of red. So ladies in those days wear a little red jacket and a skirt, right? And the little boy would have a little red hat. Those two pieces of red merge through the picture, so you put a little yellow in with the red to create orange and put it close to this, making it, say, a little girl or something. And back here, this is taking colour through the painting. This is necessary in almost all forms of art. And the little faces, which the old masters used as little red blobs, he would probably use in a succession of little ticks like this, just to indicate. You don't have to draw eyes, nose, mouths and ears and stuff, and so forth. And already there's a very simple, not a very good, but a very simple statement of a bit of a sky, a few people, a little promenade, two boats. He would work out in the open from not oil paintings, but from watercolour sketches or pencil sketches and a few colour notes in pastel and watercolour, and go back into the studio for the finished job, but always keeping the vivacity and liveliness of his work because of the way he held the brush. Very important is the use of brushes in painting, because if one holds a brush in this fashion, it is possible to twirl it. It is not to say that this one should stick to this is only a little trick actually, but was very helpful in the painting of sky and sea by the old chaps. And not only can you twirl it, you can twiddle it. And if it becomes a little bit turgid and heavy, stand back, look, take your light brush again and lighten it here again with the same process like this. Indeed, what you are doing is mixing on the canvas, and this is something one should emphasize with this school of painters. They mix their colors mainly on the canvas. It's only the atomic mixing with a palette knife on the palette itself. They put the colors onto the canvas. Indeed, it's not against the rules, if you can afford it, to do that. Squeezing directly out of the tube and working that into the picture. This is often done. Van Gogh practiced this quite a lot. Now, the ladies' dresses in those days were many black bonnets. I'm old enough to almost remember. The ladies wore little black bonnets, which are little accents here and there. Gentlemen with the top hats, sometimes of an exquisite grey colour. Sometimes they would have, one lady, for instance, I'll do this one more or less accurately, would have this kind of shape with the skirt like that. And all these, let's call them Victorian shapes, if you like, they immediately tell the age of the picture. And the whole of the French Impressionist movement is redolent with the actual colours and shapes of these dresses. We have now a picture, a 12th or 15th in the state in which Boudin would have painted it, but it lacks the clarity and it lacks the drawing, but this is his basic structure. So having shown you that little bit, I want to show you a little bit of Pissarro to show how he would have worked out of doors. This little canvas is about the size of the canvas that Pissarro would have used, and they went out into nature, usually sitting on a little stool under a parasol, sunshade, because of the brightness of the sky, and they would probably pre-mix their colour, holding, very important, they held the colour up to the sky, and I've got a little note here which tells me. And they would work very slowly, very quietly, painting directional brush strokes, open. Broadly speaking, the blue of the sky, especially in France, and especially, of course, in mid-Victorian times, was pure, the air was pure, and they would paint on a white canvas using thick impasto. Some they mixed with the palette knife, some they mixed direct with the brush. Now, the use of this colour I'm using now is quite a light French-type blue, which immediately registers as the roof. Up here's a chimney. The irregular side of the tiles. There's another chimney here. And gradually they would work around through the picture. I'll jump away from this because there's a tree here, just to show the use of blue in the boughs of the tree. I've emphasized this because at this time they had taken the black and the dark browns and ochres from the palette, and everything now is prismatic in colour, so that shadows in the tree and under the tree would be not just blue, but blue with touches of red in it to make it purple, all making a prismatic. I'm jumping about on purpose to show the movement. Everything's jagged, crisp, and placed in relationships. He would work like this. I'm going across the canvas now to the other tree. The reason for this is they would keep the picture going. We say keep the picture going with little stabs of colour, gradually realising. And you must remember that Impressionists painted not in primary and secondary and tertiary colours, but in a lightened palette. The palette itself physically was lighter. The tones of the paint they used were lighter because they were working outside and they needed a lot of prismatic colouring. And with the same blue, he would place to make these little windows. Now, as a complementary to that, the complementary of blue being orange, yellow, he would pick up quite a bright and intense There's the yellow, there's the red, mixed together to make it quite a jolly little yellow for the shutters. Of course they use green, all kinds of colours. In this case, this immediately starts using the prismatic colouring one associates with Impressionism. It seems a little illogical to use a white canvas to paint white upon it, but you see the prismatic quality of the paint on it, it becomes necessary to shine through. At the end of the day, the canvas will appear to be covered with a series of little dots, and interspersed with those is the canvas itself. It's a very old form of painting. It's really, in a small way, like bas-relief. It's again the old master technique of thicks and thins. The early Impressionists were just simply trying to express, with different touches of colour adjacent to each other, the liveliness and vivacity that is created by light upon colour in nature. In Impressionist painting especially, the texture is of great importance. And they didn't always, of course, use pure pigments. I mean, when you use pure pigments, you come into the realms of pointillism. The broader you use your strokes, generally over the painting, the fresher it is and the more primitive it appears, like a child. Indeed, I associate Pissarro, although he's certainly a famous painter, that he's very childlike, not childish, but childlike in his work. It's extremely sophisticated in another way, but the great beauty of the work of a man like this is in his natural simplicity of drawing and painting, just like a child, and enjoying it as a child does. All children work, it seems to me, happily with paints. Usually they paint it all over themselves, but anyway, they enjoy it. Now, this is about the density of Pissarro's work. It's a very expensive form of painting, but a very technically good one. Once the picture's been dotted, it's quite permissible to go within the dots. It gives it an added luster in a way. It's a good thing to put plenty of paint on and think more or less of tightening the technique up as you advance. But one would observe, for instance, that this is up close is quite crude and in a way unaesthetic. But I know that from a distance the colours mixing optically, this is the idea of it. Instead of atomic mixing, we have an optical mixing of colour. They aimed, in fact, non-varnish. They aimed purely for the visual effect of colour and texture. And that's about all I can do to this. Thank you very much.